I woke up to the sound of Laura's cell phone buzzing on the nightstand. I reached for it and saw a series of messages from an unknown number. My heart raced as I read through them. They were intimate and explicit messages between my wife Laura and another man. The sun had barely risen, casting a pale light through the bedroom window. I sat up slowly, rubbing my eyes and glancing at the clock. It was 6:15 a.m. It was too early for anything but bad news. The phone kept buzzing, pulling me into a reality I wasn't ready to face. I picked up the phone and swiped at the screen. My eyes widened as I read the first few words. "Last night was amazing. I can't wait to see you again." My breath caught in my throat. My fingers trembled as I scrolled through the rest of the messages. Each one was more graphic than the last. They spoke of stolen moments, secret meetings, and a passion that should have been mine. I was so shocked I couldn't speak. I kept hearing her name, and her responses were full of the same heat and longing. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead, and my stomach churned with a mix of anger, hurt, and disbelief. I called out to her, but she was already gone. She'd left early for her morning yoga class. I must have forgotten my cell phone, which I never did. I threw on some clothes and ran out of the house. My mind was racing as I tried to think of what to do next. I needed to get out of the house, away from the memories that suddenly felt tainted. I needed space to think and figure out what the hell I was going to do. I stumbled into the kitchen. The familiar smell of coffee did little to soothe my nerves. I poured myself a cup, my hands still shaking. Each sip tasted bitter, but I forced it down, hoping it would clear my head. "Mark, you okay?" It was Jake, my neighbor. Jake, my neighbor, was standing at the back door, looking concerned. "Jake, I found something. I think Laura is having an affair." Jake's eyes widened in shock. "What are you sure?" I handed him the phone, and he read the messages for himself. His expression darkened as he scrolled through them. His jaw tightened with anger. "This is Dan." "Mark, I'm so sorry." I nodded, swallowing hard. "I don't know what to do." Jake looked at me, his eyes wide. "I feel like my whole world is." He was in a bad way, so he put a hand on my shoulder and gave me a comforting squeeze. I took a deep breath and told myself not to make any hasty decisions. I needed to talk to Laura and hear her side of the story. I nodded again, though the thought of confronting her made my chest tighten with dread. "Yeah, I know, but how do I even start that conversation?" "One step at a time," Jake said softly. "You don't have to figure it all out right now. Just take it one step at a time." I forced myself to finish the conversation. I got coffee and the warmth spread through my chest, but it didn't help much. I thanked Jake and went to my car. Each step felt heavier than the last. The drive to work was a blur. I kept replaying the messages in my mind, each one a dagger to my heart. Laura's laughter echoed in my ears, and her smile and the way she looked at me. How could she do this? How could she betray everything we'd built together? I parked in the lot and sat there for a moment, staring. I stared at the steering wheel, my phone buzzing again. I flinched, half expecting another message from that unknown number. It was just a reminder about a meeting later that day. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I couldn't focus on work, not with this weight crushing my chest, but I had to keep going, keep moving forward, even if each step felt like walking through quicksand. As I walked into the office, my colleague Sarah noticed the look on my face. "Mark, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a weak smile. It was a rough morning. She nodded sympathetically. "If you need anything, just let me know." "Thanks, Sarah," I said, appreciating her concern. But what I needed, no one here could give. I needed answers. And the only person who had them was Laura. Throughout the day, I went through the motions. My mind never strayed far from those messages. Every ring of the phone, every ping of an email. By the time I finally left the office, I was on edge. I felt like a spring wound up tight, ready to snap. I drove home slowly, dreading the confrontation that awaited me when I pulled into the driveway. Laura's car was already there. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself for what was to come. I found her in the living room, flipping through a magazine, looking as serene as ever. For a moment, I just stood there watching her, trying to reconcile the woman I loved with the woman I'd just seen. I said, "The one who had betrayed me, Laura." I barely whispered it. She looked up, smiling. "Hey honey, how was your day?" I clenched my fists, feeling my blood boil. "We need to talk." Her smile faltered, and worry crossed her face. "What about it?" I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. I know about the other man." Her eyes widened in shock, and pain flashed across her face. "Mark, I can explain." I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. Laura, how could you? How could you do this to us? Her eyes filled with tears as she reached for me, but I stepped back. I couldn't bear to see Ross hurt. It was still too fresh. Please, Mark, let me explain. But I couldn't hear it, not now. I turned away, the weight of her betrayal too much to bear. I needed time and space to process everything. As I walked out the door, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. I ended up at a small park on the edge of town, the kind of place we used to go. I parked the car and got out, sitting on a bench by the lake. The water was calm, reflecting the orange and pink hues of the setting sun. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I pulled out my phone and copied all the messages to my phone. The messages were still open, the proof of Laura's betrayal glaring back at me. I felt a tear slip down my cheek and angrily wiped it away. How could she do this? How could everything go so wrong? We'd built together, so I wasn't sure what she saw in me. My phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Jake. Hey man, just checking in. How are you holding up? I sighed and typed back, not great. I just needed to get out for a bit. He replied almost immediately, I'm here if you need to talk. I appreciated the offer, but right now I needed to be alone. I needed to figure out what to do next. How do you move forward when your whole world has been turned upside down? As the sun dipped below, I realized I needed to grieve for the life I thought we had. The sun was setting as I made a decision. I would go back and talk to Laura, but not tonight. I needed to process what had happened. I had to rebuild the trust that had been broken. I would have to face the reality of what had happened and decide if there was anything left to salvage. For now, I sat in the quiet, letting the calm of the lake wash over me, trying to find a way to breathe again. I spent the night at a cheap motel. The room was pretty grim, reflecting my mood. The walls were thin, the bed uncomfortable, and there was a faint smell of mildew in the air. But it didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the storm raging in my mind. I lay on the lumpy mattress, staring at the cracked ceiling, my thoughts racing. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't find a moment of peace. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Laura's face, heard her laughter, and felt the sting of her betrayal all over again. How long had I didn't see the signs? The pain was unbearable. It felt like a physical ache in my chest that wouldn't go away. I reached for my phone and scrolled through old photos of us. Each one was a reminder of happier times. There we were at our wedding, Laura beaming in her white dress. Another picture of us at the beach, her arms wrapped around me, both of us smiling at the camera. How could she betray me when we had so much? The clock on the nightstand showed 2 o'clock, 0:0 a.m. The hours just kept on going, each minute feeling like an eternity. I couldn't escape the relentless questions that were tormenting me. Was it something I did, or something I didn't do? The doubt was there, right in front of me, tearing me apart. Around 3 a.m., I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone and called Jake. It rang a few times before he picked up. His voice was groggy with sleep. Mark, what's going on? He asked, sounding concerned. I can't do this, Jake, I said, my voice breaking. I can't stop thinking about it. How could she do this to us? He sighed deeply. I'm so sorry, man. I can't imagine what you're going through. Do you want me to come over? I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. No, I just needed to hear a friendly voice. Jake said firmly, You're not losing your mind. You just feel like it. This is the hardest thing you've ever faced, but you're not alone. We'll get through this together one day at a time. Thanks, Jake, I whispered, grateful for his unwavering support. I don't know what I'd do without you. You don't have to figure it all out right now. Just focus on getting through tonight. Tomorrow we'll tackle the rest. We talked for a while longer, Jake doing his best to reassure me and keep me grounded. We finally ended the call. I felt a little better, like I had a support system in the chaos, but as the night went on, the stress came back. I thought about every moment of our marriage, questioning everything. There was the time she was late coming home from work, the business tricks she took, and the way she seemed distant lately. Had she been seeing someone else? The betrayal felt like a knife twisting in my gut. In the early hours of the morning, the weight of it all became too much. I broke down, sobbing. I was shaking uncontrollably, overwhelmed by grief. This wasn't just the end of my marriage. It felt like the end of my world. I had loved Laura with everything I had, and now it was all in ruins. By the time the first light of dawn seeped through the grimy motel, I was exhausted, my tears spent, and I felt hollow. I felt like a shell of the man I used to be. One thing I knew for certain was that nothing would ever be the same again. I lay there, staring at the dim light filtering in, and made a promise to myself. I would confront Laura again. This time, I promised myself I would listen. I would hear her out and try to understand why she did what she did. Maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to move forward. Even if we couldn't, I needed closure. I needed answers. With that thought in mind, I finally allowed myself to drift off to sleep. My body and mind were utterly spent. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new heartache. But for now, I had survived the worst night of my life. I would find a way to keep surviving the days that followed. They were a blur. I threw myself into work, trying to avoid going home. When I got home, my office became my refuge. The constant buzz of activity was a welcome distraction from the chaos inside me. Laura texted and called, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. Her words and voice were too painful to face. I needed space and time to breathe after work. I drove less often through the city, the hum of the engine and the blur of passing lights providing a strange kind of comfort. Late at night, when the world was quiet, I would park by the lake and just sit there watching the water ripple under the moonlight. The stillness helped calm me. One evening, I was sitting by the lake when my phone buzzed with a message from Jake. It said, "Hey, there's a support group that meets on Wednesdays. Might be worth checking out." I stared at the message for a long time. A support group? The idea of sharing my pain with strangers felt daunting, but the thought of being understood and not feeling so alone was tempting. The following Wednesday, I found myself standing outside a small community center. My heart was pounding with anxiety. I took a deep breath and walked inside. I opened the door and walked in. A group of people were sitting in a circle, their faces kind and welcoming. I hesitated at the door, feeling out of place, but a woman with a warm smile gestured for me to join them. "Hi, I'm Sarah," she said as I sat down. "We're glad you're here." "Thanks," I muttered, still unsure if I was ready for this. The group went around each person, sharing their story. It was all too familiar when it was my turn. I hesitated, my words catching in my throat. "My name is Mark," I began, my voice shaky. "My wife cheated on me. I found out a few days ago and I feel like my world has fallen apart." A man across the circle nodded sympathetically. "I know how that feels, Mark. It's like a punch to the gut." Tears welled up in my eyes, but I forced myself to continue. "I don't know what to do. What do I do? I can't stop thinking about it. Every memory feels tainted." "It's okay to feel that way," Sarah said gently. "You're grieving the loss of what you thought your marriage was. It's a process and it takes time." Another woman, Lisa, spoke up when I found out about my husband's. I felt completely lost after my husband had an affair. This group helped me find my footing again. "You're not alone." The honesty and understanding in their words broke through the walls I had built around myself. I felt a tear slip down my cheek and quickly wiped it away. "Thank you," I whispered. I needed to hear that as the weeks passed. I continued attending the group each week. Each meeting brought a little more clarity and a little more strength. We shared our fears, our anger, our hopes for the future. The support and advice I received were invaluable. But more than that, I needed to know that I wasn't alone. I wasn't the only one feeling the pain. One evening after a particularly rough day, I found myself sitting in the circle, my head in my hands. "I don't know if I can ever trust her again," I admitted, "but I miss her. I miss us." "It's normal to feel conflicted," said Tom, in a quiet voice. "It takes time to rebuild trust after a similar experience. It won't be easy, but if both of you are committed, it's possible." Sarah nodded. "It's about finding what you need to heal. Mark, whether that's with Laura or without her, you have to focus on your own well-being." When she said that, it really hit home for me. I realized that I'd been so consumed by Laura's betrayal that I'd neglected my own healing. I needed to take care of myself to find my own path forward. So I started going for long walks in the evenings. The rhythmic sound of my footsteps was really soothing to me. I got back in touch with old friends. It was good to see them again. They were so familiar, and we had so many shared memories. Slowly, I started to see a glimmer of hope. There was a possibility of healing. One night, as I sat by the lake watching the moonlight dance on the water, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for so long. The pain was still there, but it wasn't defining me. I was healing, one step at a time. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time since that night, I felt a spark of hope. I would find my way through this, not just survive, but live. Maybe I would come out stronger on the other side. One evening, I finally agreed to meet Laura at a cafe to talk. I arrived early, my stomach in knots, and found a quiet corner where we could talk without being disturbed. The minutes ticked by slowly, and my mind embraced what ifs and half. When Laura walked in, I had a few questions. She looked tired, her eyes red from crying, and her shoulders slumped as if carrying the weight of the world. She spotted me and walked over, a tentative smile on her face. "Hi, Mark," she said. "Hi," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. We sat down in silence, both of us searching for the right words to start this difficult conversation. "I'm sorry," she began, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm so sorry for what I did. I never meant to hurt you." I nodded, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Why? Laura, why did you do it?" She took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she reached for her coffee cup. "I felt lonely. Mark, you were always working late, always tired when you came home. I felt neglected, like I didn't matter anymore. Then I met him. He made me feel noticed, appreciated. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake, but I didn't know how to stop. Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice breaking. "We could have worked through it together." I was scared. She admitted that she was scared that I'd leave her and scared that I'd hate her. "I didn't want to burden you with my feelings when you were already so stressed." She was already so stressed that her words cut deep, but I needed to hear them. "So what do we do from here?" "I don't know," she whispered, wiping away her tears. "I want to make things right. I want to go to counseling to try and rebuild what we lost. But I understand if you can't forgive." I looked at her, the woman I had loved for so long, now a stranger in so many ways. "It's not that simple. Laura, trust is hard to rebuild once it's broken. I'm not sure if I can ever trust you again." "I know," she said softly, "but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to try." "I love you, Mark. I never stopped loving you." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of our shared history and the pain of recent events. We talked for hours, laying everything out on the table. I told her about the sleepless nights, the endless questions, and the support group that had become my lifeline. She listened, her eyes filled with regret and sorrow as the evening wore on. I felt a strange mix of emotions, sadness for what we had lost, anger for the betrayal, and a faint glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way forward. When the cafe began to empty, it was clear that we had talked as much as we could for one night. We stood up to leave. "Thank you for meeting me," Laura said, her voice choked with emotion. "I know this isn't easy for you. It's not easy for either of us. We'd talked as much as we could for one night." We stood up to leave. "Thank you for meeting me," Laura said, her voice choked with emotion. "I know this isn't easy for you," I replied. "It's not easy for either of us. But we need to face this if we have any chance of moving forward," she said. She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Can we meet again? Maybe talk more? See a counselor together?" "We can try," I said, though uncertainty nodded me, "but I need time. Bora, time to see if we can really do this." "I understand," she said, her eyes searching for any sign of hope. "I'll be here." As we walked out into the cool night air, a heavy silence fell between us. The road ahead was uncertain, and the wounds were still raw. But for the first time since the betrayal, I felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to heal. We said our goodbyes, each of us heading in different directions. As I walked to my car, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of relief. We had faced the reality of our situation, and while the future was still unclear, we had taken the first step towards healing. That realization was a start. Weeks turned into months. Over the course of several months, Laura and I attended weekly counseling sessions to work through our issues. It was challenging and painful work, but we both wanted to try. We sat in Dr. Evans's cozy office, laying bare our feelings and fears. The process was slow, and some sessions ended in tears. But we kept going. One evening after a particularly tough session, Laura turned to me as we walked to the car. She asked, "Do you think we'll ever really be okay again?" I paused, considering her question. "I don't know, Laura," I replied. "But I do know we're trying, and that's more than we were doing before." She nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "I guess you're right. It's better to cry than to do nothing." Slowly, trust began to rebuild, though the scars remained. There were days when the past felt too close and too raw, but we pushed through. I made an effort to focus on myself and rediscover myself. I picked up my old guitar, the one that had been gathering dust in the corner for years. I strummed the strings and felt a sense of peace wash over me. Music had always been my refuge, and it felt good to reconnect with it. I also started jogging. On another Saturday morning, I met up with Jake for coffee. It had been a while since we'd had a chance to catch up. "How are things with you and Laura?" he asked, sipping his cappuccino. I sighed, stirring my own coffee. It's a work in progress, but counseling is helping. It's just a matter of time." Jake nodded. "Rebuilding trust takes time. Just take it one day at a time." "Thanks, Jake," I said, grateful for his unwavering support, and thanks for pushing me to join that support group. It really helped. Mark, that's what friends are for, he replied, clapping me on the back. Reconnecting with friends and family provided a solid foundation of support. They listened without judgment. They offered advice when I needed it. They gave me the space to heal. My sister Emily was a rock. She was always ready with a kind word or a home. I had a cooked meal delivered for dinner tonight. She texted one afternoon to say it had been too long. I went to Emily's kitchen table that evening and sat at her table, enjoying the aroma of her famous lasagna. It was just what I needed. I said, thanks, and took a bite. She smiled warmly and said, I'm glad you came. I told her that Laura and I were talking more, and that we were really talking. I said it was hard, but that I thought we were making progress. That's good to hear. Just remember to take care of yourself too. I am. I started playing guitar again, and I'm jogging in the mornings. That's great, Mark. I'm proud of you. The journey was far from over, but I felt stronger and more resilient. The pain was still there, a dull ache that reminded me of what we had lost, but it no longer defined me. I was learning to live with it and move forward. One evening, as I stood on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, I felt a sense of peace. The world was quiet, and the air felt cool against my skin. I realized that while my life had changed forever, I had survived the betrayal that shattered me, but it had also forced me to grow and rediscover who I was. Laura joined me, slipping her hand into mine. Beautiful, isn't it? She said softly. Yeah, I agree. We've come a long way, haven't we? She said, leaning her head on my shoulder. I think we're going to be okay. As we stood there watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a sense of hope. Our journey was far from over, and there would be more challenges ahead, but I was ready to face them. I had survived the storm, and I was ready to embrace whatever came next.